I think that's the reason why C.S. Lewis's works, whether children's stories like Narnia or his philosophical works, are so significant is just the amount of spiritual weight that's woven into Eustace's story. Like, from everything that Aslan, who really represents Christ in the whole series through his resurrection and everything he's doing for characters throughout the story, everything that symbolizes, and just the fact that, like, he didn't become a human again when he admitted he was wrong. He became a human again when he admitted he was wrong and then realized that only Aslan, only Christ could make him right again.
Hi, Brooke. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. So thanks for doing a podcast with me.
Of course. I'm excited.
Yeah. So we're going to call this Undragoned, and I'll tell you a little story about Undragoned. This will be a story for everybody else too, and kind of where that comes from originally, and then why are we doing a podcast? So let's maybe talk a little bit about why do a podcast as well. So let's actually talk about why do a podcast, and then we'll go into what it's called. So when I was around 16, my dad, your grandpa, Merle, he bought me a beat up old junker car, a 1974 Dodge Dart. It was this puke yellow color. It was totally, when you're 16, you're kind of excited about getting to drive and everything. And then it's like, oh my gosh, I got a beater. I mean, thankfully it had low miles. I don't know. He got it from some old lady's garage. Like, I don't know how he found this thing, but he paid like $350 for it, but it needed new brakes. It needed new tires. It needed all this stuff on it. And so we started getting together to work on the car, and he'd take a break. He'd say, we get the car jacked up. We've got tires off of it. I'm basically stuck there at his house now. And he'd be like, let's go get some coffee. And we'd go to the coffee shop and we would sit and talk. And the neat thing about this is if you go back, so one of my 16, if you go back about 6 years, Grandma and Grandpa had divorced, and I lived with Grandma, and really didn't, I spent time with my dad, but he was going through some things, which we'll probably get into in this conversation, things that he was going through. Particularly through this process, he was essentially becoming a born-again Christian. And by basically having me cornered in a restaurant over a cup of coffee, he was able to have some meaningful conversations with me that just basically started as him sharing about his past and his childhood and mistakes that he made. And he didn't want for me to make the same mistakes that he made. And, I think that's important. There's something to passing on legacies that aren't just telling good stories, but also, struggles. And Grandpa Merland definitely believed in struggles, but on the other side of struggles usually are beautiful things. And he wanted to turn his struggles into, hopefully opportunities for me. And so I've been kind of thinking about this as you're about to turn 16 and us have some conversations together of like, well, I could do the same thing, take you to a coffee shop, we could talk. You are starting to like coffee now. Of course, I'm addicted to coffee. I have a t-shirt that says I like coffee and maybe 3 people. It's a very fitting t-shirt for me. But, then I thought, well, I have a podcast now. Podcasting's not all that difficult. I've got you basically trapped here in front of a microphone, And so we could talk and share stories and get to know each other more. And I can tell you a little bit more about your grandpa. I can tell you a little bit more about me. And all centered around this will be Christianity. And we're going to start here with C.S. Lewis, which I'll let you cover quite a bit about. But we're calling it Undragoned. This was a domain name that I purchased probably over 25 years ago. And in one of C.S. Lewis's books, The Voyage of Dawn Treader, which is part of the Chronicles of Narnia, there is a pretty incredible story, which I won't get into yet, but essentially it's a boy who turns into a dragon and turns back into a boy, and he becomes undragoned. So we'll uncover that whole story and how he becomes undragoned and what that means to just a good analogy, I suppose, for life and for Christianity as well, and becoming a Christian, what all that means. So thank you. Appreciate it. What were your first thoughts when I said, hey, let's do a podcast?
I think you told me just after church, and it was one of those things where you could really see, from your journey starting, 30 years ago and buying the domain name 2 decades ago. It was really one of those things where I could see that God was working through this and it was part of his plan. So, even getting over the podcasting jitters, just knowing God's figuring this out so I don't have to. And I love Narnia. I don't think I've actually finished it, so getting to do that will be really cool over these coming months. But I've had a lot of really good experiences with you and with C.S. Lewis, doing online courses on C.S. Lewis, and so I just thought this is something that we've both been prepared for our whole lives leading up to this, and so this is a really cool culmination of that.
Yeah, sure is. I'll put. I've done. One of the first books Grandpa Merlin gave me was Mere Christianity, amongst a few other books, and we'll probably get into a few of those. Certainly the first child books he gave me, kind of teen adolescence, was the Chronicles of Narnia, and I had no clue what that meant. I think I was in the 7th grade and why he gave those to me, but it's pretty obvious. And I should mention at some point where that all comes from, like how he discovered C.S. Lewis as well. But, and then, read him quite a bit all through college. When I met your mom, then a year into us being together, I took her to London and to Oxford, where C.S. Lewis taught, and he was friends with J.R.R. Tolkien. And we went and visited his home and his grave and the church that he went to. And we had drinks and dinner at the bar that he would get to together with all of the professors, and they would talk about their books and philosophy and literature and all that cool stuff. And so, it was pretty neat to sit in. The bar is called the White Horse, and the group is called the Inklings. And just to sit there and be like, some of the greatest minds of the 20th century, sat in this bar and talked about amazing things that only if the walls could speak, you could figure out what they talked about. So it was a really cool experience I got to do with your mom. And then I did a Bible study at Kensington Church, and we did Mere Christianity and the Screw Tape Letters. And so really cool now to get to share that. Well, and then we did take some of the courses with Hillsdale. So Hillsdale does have some great courses online. So anyone listening, go check out the Hillsdale courses if you want to learn more about C.S. Lewis. They're free. They're totally cool. But so let's kind of, if this is a series we're going to do on Mere Christianity to start out, let's kind of unpack this first book. Do you want to kind of start with the history, like how this whole book got started? All right.
So C.S. Lewis, he was born in, I believe, and he became really famous through his works, things he was doing at different universities as a teacher. And he was actually reached out to by Let me find the name.
It was somebody at the BBC.
Yeah, it was J.W. Welsh, the head of the British Broadcasting Corporation. Mm-hmm. And he had heard about Lewis and invited him to give a series of 4 radio talks. And one of his suggestions to Lewis, among a couple of others, was to talk about the Christian faith as just an ordinary person sees it, rather than a pastor or a philosopher, just, how you and me interpret the Christian faith. And Lewis thought this was a great idea, agreed to it, because he didn't think that Britain had ever really been told what Christianity is at its roots. And he thought that, especially during World War II, as it was happening at the time, they needed that. They needed something to believe in and needed to see that there was good in the world, especially in such trying times. So those 4 radio talks, 15 minutes each, that he was supposed to say, turn into a series of 4 series of 25 radio talks, which were eventually revised into the book that we have here, Mere Christianity, among a couple of others. And over time, he was able to edit that and turn that into this really cool book that we have here that doesn't just go over exactly what he said, but also the other things that he learned throughout his time after those talks.
Yeah, so let's kind of unpack that a little bit, and getting into a bit of his history. So C.S. Lewis grew up a Christian. He went to Catholic school, but his mom died when he was very young. I don't know if he was 7 to 10 years old, 9. Yeah, so he was very young. He has an older brother, and it was hard for them. It was hard on his dad too, as you can imagine, having a young wife pass away, and the boys got sent off to boarding school. And I don't think boarding school was all that fun. I don't think it was fun in general, but I think the headmaster at the boarding school they were sent to was pretty bad. And so that really, I think he lost any faith that he had prior, his sort of Catholic upbringing. And then as soon as he came of age, World War I started, and he was sent off into World War I and saw some of the worst atrocities in the modern age in World War I, when the trenches and the bombing and gassing, and pretty much lost every friend he had up until that point in the war. And it wasn't until years later that he met Tolkien and everybody else at Oxford. I mean, he had essentially declared himself an atheist. And then through lots of talks with Tolkien and some of the other members, and Lewis was, he understood mythology really well. I mean, he was essentially literature and mythology was what he taught. And Tolkien pushed him towards truth and basically said, what if Christianity and Jesus was a true myth, that it wasn't just a story that was passed on generation to generation? What if it was true? And it was on one walk where they were having this conversation that some wind blew, and sort of not just wind blew, but like a gust of wind in the middle of like a thought that Lewis was having of like, supposedly came over him of like, you know what, God is speaking to me right now, and this is the real truth. And at one point, I know he says, I believe in Mere Christianity, that like either Christianity is true and Jesus is who he says he was, or he was a lunatic. Like he can't just be in the middle. He can't just be a good prophet or just some wise guy that had a bunch of good teachings through parables. You don't go through the type of suffering that he went through, still claiming truth all the way to the end and who he was. So pretty amazing journey that Lewis went on. And of course, in his conversion thereafter, has this opportunity now to speak to the nation. I mean, imagine getting to speak to an entire nation during a war. What an honor that had to have been for him to share how he kind of like his journey, his steps to coming to faith. And I think that really is what Mere Christianity is like getting into his head of how he got from Christianity to atheism back to Christianity and understanding, that entire journey.
Yeah. I actually have a quote from one of his books, Surprised by Joy. He said, "When we set out, I did not believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, and when we reached the zoo, I did." Tolkien had planted all of these seeds in Lewis's life, and then that all came together for him during this, I believe it was a motorcycle ride. He went from, through everything that God had been working in his life, he went from atheism to Christianity in those moments.
Yeah, I mean, and for those who don't know, Tolkien is the author of Lord of the Rings. So like Tolkien's more popular in modern day, as an author than Lewis is. But really Lewis as a Christian apologist, as they would title him, arguably is one of the brightest minds of the 20th century when it comes to Christian authorship, and has really just touched a lot of people. But it all connects back to Tolkien, and that's all pretty cool. And I'm sure there were other members of the Inklings that had their hands in the whole thing as well. So, do you want to dive into the first couple chapters of Mere Christianity?
Yeah.
All right. So what's chapter 1?
So Lewis really gives us this super, almost casual opening into the book, and he starts talking about quarreling, which is something I know I do every day, especially with you. And he gives us some of the ideas of what people say when they're arguing. And there's this pattern that you really start to realize when he lays it out. We're always talking about things like promises and like, you should do for me what I did for you. And these ideas that like we all follow, like, if I did this, you should do this. And I was there first, so I should get this. And every time we quarrel, we're always going back to something. We're not just saying, I should get this because I want to. We're referencing something else. And so he's starting to dive into what that means, because it's really impactful for everything we think about when we think of Christianity, and whether it can be true is, in a conversation I have with you, I'm referencing this fact that there's some standard I have. And it's not just my standard, because you don't go and you don't say, hey, your standard's horrible, I'm not going to listen to you. You believe in that standard too. And we see that in these conversations. And he starts to get to that throughout the book.
Right. Yeah. So there's like the two people quarreling each have their own truths, personal truths, but it's like, where do those truths originate? Right. And one of them thinks they're right and the other one's wrong. But the whole idea of someone having a right, or that there even is a right or wrong, right? It's like, where does that right or wrong, come from? And a lot of atheists like to basically reference that it's like societal norms or whatever you might want to put on it. Like society just comes up with what those are, those right or wrongs. But what Lewis is trying to get at, and what a lot of other apologists have said, is if there are these truths that we know actually exist, there had to have been someone who sort of like inserted those truths into the world, into our existence.
And not only that, the fact that like, not only do we all as humans have like a herd instinct and a parental instinct and an instinct for self-preservation, like, yes, we have those things and they tell us to make decisions. If I see that someone needs my help, but it could put me in danger, I have instincts that tell me what to do. But we have something more than that, something that's all of society has, but we can ignore this, we can push it away, and it's present in us, telling us how to balance these instincts. Because you can't have an instinct and then have those instincts decide which one to use. Because all the time we're using the weaker ones. I'm going to help you even if my instinct for self-preservation is stronger than my herd instinct to help. And so he's saying that we all have to have this guide, this law, and it's a moral law, because it's telling us to choose good or bad right or wrong. And really, in the first chapters, he doesn't even get to Christianity, which is what's crazy about this book. He's just starting to lay out this idea of right and wrong, because how he approached Christianity was through a myth. He saw it as a myth. And it wasn't until he laid out the facts that he was able to trace them back to God.
Yeah, because that's what he's sort of trained himself to do in seeking truth. And so he's tries to unpack everything. And I mean, you might call it reasoning, he might call it reasoning, but you're searching, for those answers. And as he unpacks everything, it's almost like math, like he's testing it in some way. Like, does 2 + 2 really equal 4? And there's a way to test that. And so he's taking everything he's reading about the Bible, all these conversations he's having with his peers, and he's going back and he's wrestling with it to determine, like, okay, is this true or not? And at the end of the day, he has not only an intellectual experience, but then I believe, and this is the reference to the wind, which you could say is potentially the Holy Spirit, right? That he has this spiritual encounter with God, of this really realization of truth. Not just that he came to truth through a mathematical equation, but like the law entered him, basically. And like he knows it's truth now. And when that happens to you, you just know it. So do you have any personal examples of, like, I don't know, quarrels with friends, or, experiences in life where you knew, like, right or wrong? And you're thinking back, like, well, how did I even know that was, right or wrong? Like, I have a memory when I was a little kid. And funny enough, it's the silliest thing, and I struggled with it probably till I was 19 or 20 years old. But I remember probably being 4 or 5 years old. I went over to a friend's house, and his mom gave me a pack of gum, and it was like a 5-pack of juicy fruit. See, I don't know if you know what the juicy fruits were, but like a 5-pack, they were in sticks, and you got this little pack, and there were 5 sticks inside. And so you'd pull out a stick, and I chewed one piece of gum while I was there at my friend's house. Then I came home, and I had probably another piece of gum at home. And then later that day, my siblings came home, and I've got a brother and 2 sisters. And so I chewed now my 3rd piece of gum. And then my brother asked for a piece. I gave him one. And then my sister, who's the one in the middle, asked for a piece of gum, and I gave her the last one. Well, then my oldest sister came into the room, and she asked for a piece of gum. But I was out. I had no more gum to give. Now, in that moment, I was super sad. Like, I don't know why, but something came over me of, like, not having any more gum to give her. So I knew this, like, this need or wanting to share, and that it was right to share, right? And that I had this opportunity to, do something for my sister, and I shared with my other siblings and didn't share with her, and just, like, knew inherently at 4 or 5 years old that I had hurt her feelings. But, like, and I literally carried that all the way until I was like 19, 20 years old, of, like, I didn't have a stick of gum this one day, and hurt my sister's feelings, when in reality I didn't hurt her feelings, right? That it was no big deal to her. It was a stick of juicy fruit. She probably had some upstairs, in her purse or something. She was 10 years older than me, so she would have been 14, 15, maybe even close to driving. So it's like, where did that come from? Like, how at that age, and so instinctively, right, that I, like, it wasn't so much a right or wrong, like I did something wrong, but it was just this, like, instinctive compassion to want to do something for her.
Yeah, I think that's really crazy that we see that so much in younger kids, like having cousins who are 3 and 1. Just, you do like the smallest trivial thing that you think is completely fine, and they run up to you and they're like, no, that was wrong, you shouldn't have done that. And yes, you could say that that was just something that their parents put on them, but I'm sure I was like that as a little kid, always calling people out because I had such a strong sense of right and wrong. And often we grow up and we lose that. So it can't be something from society because society keeps pushing things on us all of our life. But this is something that fades. So it has to be something instinctual, given to us at birth or even before birth when we're created. And so that's just something incredible that I've been seeing through reading this, is how even adding to the truths that C.S. Lewis talks about, when you really think about this, you can see all of the truths that C.S. Lewis saw to get him here and go through that same journey. As for an experience where that's happened to me, I know there have been a lot of times, especially having a younger sister, got like the opposite experience as you. But I know, like, I'm someone to make excuses. I walked in here and I just made 3 hot cocos at once, which I never do. I'm like, if they're cold, it's because I was trying to tackle 3 hot cocos at once. And just washing over me now is like, well, I was making excuses, literally getting ready to walk in here and talk about why we're making excuses instead of listening to our moral law. And for me, it's always those small things that I go through day-to-day life, and I'm realizing these little like bits of right and wrong that I see, and sometimes I ignore them. But I also know I have a career exploration class right now, being in high school, and we started the year talking about personality, and I would call myself a little bit of a self-proclaimed expert.
This is true.
Thanks to a friend of mine that got me into it. But I was so mad because we were talking about a kind of personality that I thought was sort of misleading and wrong, at least compared to what I learned. And I think my teacher thought I was hilarious because she's amazing. But I was so like angry about what we were doing, and I felt like it was a waste of my time and misleading to everyone else. And I was vocal about it. And later we got to Enneagram, and my teacher was right away like, Brooke, I know what you are because you're always talking about right and wrong, and it's one of the Enneagrams. So I could just see like how much I put that out into the world. Even when I'm not keeping it perfectly myself, I, especially from like having more of a journey into the Bible now, can see this right or wrong and want to uphold other people to it, even when I'm not upholding myself to those standards.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a cool story. And speaking of the Bible, you and Mom are reading the Bible this year, trying to get through the entire Bible in 1 year. You're on a reading program. I know you're still doing a pretty good job. You're doing better than most. And God's not going to beat you up for not having finished within the year. I know we have just a few days left in the year. It's okay if you don't finish. You've probably read more of the Bible now than I have, as I have not read it cover to cover. But yeah, I'm proud of you guys for doing that. I think that's awesome that you're doing that, and that's something that's pretty cool to see you and Mom do and spend time together, even if it's just 10 or 15 minutes a day that you guys are able to, share that experience, because that's something that she hasn't done, as well. So where does Lewis go from the right and wrong? Do we want to continue to kind of unpack the first chapter?
I think what he starts doing throughout the first and second chapters is he goes a lot into the arguments people have against that, which, like we've already talked about, instincts and how they can't really be part of it. But I think one of the really important things he talks about is how this isn't just something like a standard that America has or that the 21st century has, because obviously we think back to like the Salem witch trials and we're saying those people had no moral law. So obviously this can't be something we're born with. It has to be a society thing because they were out burning women because they thought they were witches. Or, people used to have 5 wives. And so clearly it's not something that endures through generations like C.S. Lewis is saying it is. But when you really look at those things, witches were burned during the Salem witch trials because people thought that there were women who were selling their souls to the devil and working for Satan. And so they were trying to uphold goodness and righteousness. Even if their methods were pretty horrible, they still had this sense of right and wrong that they were using to try and make these decisions, even if they weren't perfect. It is sort of your typical villain arc of they're doing something for all the right reasons, but all the wrong things.
Right.
And, we think people used to have 5 wives, but throughout generations, C.S. Lewis notes that we've always thought that, you can't have my girl, or, what's mine can't be yours. You can't steal from me. And we've always said men shouldn't run away from battle, and that's looked down upon, and you shouldn't cheat the people you're close to. So even if sometimes our interpretations of this moral law and what we should do with it change, but the same fruits of the Spirit in the Bible have persevered since the Bible and way before it too, since the creation of the world. So throughout everything from generations to societies to cultures and countries, this has always endured, this idea of a moral law, and it's always at its essence been the same.
Right. So the idea of a moral law, just that we have that idea even planted into our head, means there had to have been a giver of that law. There had to have been a giver of the idea of even the fact that there's a moral law, that there's a standard that we're supposed to be, abiding by. And now there's, like you've said, different interpretations of what that standard should be over time. But the fact that we know that there is some sort of interpretation means there's a lawgiver. And so that's really where Lewis is coming to the fact that if there's a lawgiver, there has to be a God. There has to be another being outside of us, which is essentially, the creator. And the law existed prior to our creation, and it exists now, and it will likely exist, afterwards. And so, yeah, it's pretty amazing when he's able to he dissects the whole thing throughout the first 2 chapters of just, breaking it down in a very eloquent sort of English way that he does. But if you do take a moment to try to, really understand what he's saying, it all does make a lot of sense. So that's interesting in the sense of, we'll kind of close here, if that's okay. Are you good to close? So we can kind of talk about Eustace's journey then, and Undragoned. So the Voyage of Dawn Treader, as I mentioned, is one of the books in the Chronicles of Narnia. And Lucy and I believe Edmund, who are the youngest 2 of the 4 blanking on their last names, Pevensey?
Something like that.
I'm going to have to pick up the book and read it again. So there's 2 brothers and 2 sisters who originally go to Narnia in the Chronicles or in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And the youngest 2 get brought back to Narnia in the Voyage of Dawn Treader. And when they get brought into Narnia, they're pulled in through a painting, and they happen to be with their cousin. They're staying with their aunt and uncle at the time. And so their cousin's name is Eustace. So he finds himself in Narnia. And he's really just this rotten, horrible kid. He's totally spoiled by his parents. He wants his way with everything, and is, of course, finding himself in Narnia, where Lucy and Edmund used to be king and queen, and they understand duty and honor and, working hard and helping others. And Eustace wants everybody to wait over him, get him food and drink, and he doesn't want to do any work and all of this. And then they're on a boat. That's the Dawn Treader. They're on this boat going on this voyage, I believe with Prince Caspian. and they come ashore an island, and Eustace has had enough. He's like, nobody's playing my game. Nobody wants to, give me time of day. So I'm going to run off. And he finds himself on this island, essentially a deserted island, and comes across a cave. And as he ventures into the cave, he eventually discovers a treasure hoard. And the treasure hoard is actually a dragon treasure hoard. And if you know anything about dragons, that's what they do. Just think to Tolkien and The Hobbit. Dragons steal all the gold and treasure and jewels they can, and they bring it to a cave or a mountain somewhere, and they hold it and keep it for themselves. And Eustace is like, man, I've struck rich. And not only does he think he's going to take it, but he thinks he's going to get out of Narnia and get back home and take all this back home. So he's like, the bee's knees back home. He's going to be the cool kid, and he's going to have all the money and everything. And so he puts on this bracelet that's like gold and jewels or whatever. And when he puts the bracelet on, magic overcomes him and he becomes a dragon. And he can't take the bracelet off. He's kind of wandering around this island now as a dragon. He goes back to try to tell the group at the ship, they're at the beach, who he is. Of course, he can't talk. They don't know who he is. They're about ready to fight him and kill him. And he eventually figures out a way to communicate with them, though, and starts to help them. And he helps them gather food and supplies for the ship. And, through this process, realizes he was really an awful kid. And he wasn't nice to his cousins. He wasn't nice to everybody else that was trying to be helpful to him. Of course, it's really awful being a dragon. Not fun at all. It's very lonely being a dragon. Being a dragon is very lonely. You take all your treasure, you go into a cave, and you live there all by yourself. And, after a few days with this, he's done. He's done being a dragon. And Aslan shows up to him. Again, Narnian magic. Aslan just suddenly appears, and they have a little conversation. And Aslan says, "Okay, are you done?" It's kind of like repentance, where repentance is about turning away from darkness, turning towards light, turning towards good, realizing your past mistakes, and saying to Jesus, "I'm a sinner, and you can make me right, and I'm ready to be right." So Eustace is ready to be a boy again. He's ready to be right. And Aslan says, well, in order to do that, you need to use your dragon claws and take off your dragon scales. And so he attempts to do this and goes and looks over into a pool of water. Of course, the whole process of using his claws to tear apart his dragon scales and sort of descale himself is pretty painful. And he looks into this pool of water, and he's still a dragon. Aslan says, you'll have to do it again. And so I believe it's 3 times, which is a pretty significant number in Christianity, 3. And Eustace finally says, I can't do this on my own. And so Aslan says, lay back and I'll do it for you. And there was something my dad used to always share with me. Mom just got me a nice little plaque for Christmas that says it on it. But it's essentially its concept of turning it over, that, through Christianity, it's realizing that while there's right and wrong, we're sinful and we can't do right on our own, and we can't become whole again on our own. And so by turning it over to, in this case, Eustace is turning it over to Aslan. Aslan can make him right again, and Aslan can make him whole. But it's a painful process, not only for you in trying to do it, but of course Aslan has to put his claws into Eustace and rip off the dragon scales, and then he's a boy again. And so I think it's a beautiful story. It's a painful story, as my dad would say. It was a bit of a struggle for Eustace. But in the end, he's changed, and he couldn't have been changed without going through that experience, and also without Aslan. And so that's how it is in our lives. We can't move forward in life with, or at least we can't move forward living the life that God wants for us and really being right and straight with God without God in our lives. And we have to turn it over and ask Him to change us. And that's when the Holy Spirit enters, and we can have that experience. So this is Undragoned, and we're going to talk more about these experiences. And we're going to unpack more of Mere Christianity. And if our audience likes it and they want more, or maybe we'll just record for ourselves and, we'll just have these episodes that we can listen to later. But we'll continue to unpack some of C.S. Lewis and go through the rest of Mere Christianity and maybe some other books from there. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's the reason why C.S. Lewis's works, whether children's stories like Narnia or his philosophical works, are so significant, is just the amount of spiritual weight that's woven into Eustace's story. Like, from everything that Aslan, who really represents Christ in the whole series through his resurrection and everything he's doing for characters throughout the story, everything that symbolizes, and just the fact that he didn't become a human again when he admitted he was wrong. He became a human again when he admitted he was wrong and then realized that only Aslan, only Christ could make him right again. And we know that he wasn't perfect after that. I'm sure he still struggled as a human, because even when we're on Dragon in our own lives and we manage to turn everything over to God and start growing spiritually, we still mess up a lot. And we still need our Aslan, Christ, to be with us through every step. And I just think everything that C.S. Lewis does through all of his books in the Chronicles of Narnia is so significant because of that, because it's also our story and everyone else's story. And there's, in my opinion, no better way to enjoy fiction than being able to enjoy it and then realize how much of yourself is in there.
That's beautiful. Well said. I couldn't have said it any better. So thank you so much, Brooke. Appreciate this, and let's do it again.
Thank you. Let's do it.
All right.